not long after the Ugandan Asians arrived, I had a phone call from the education office in Dolgellau saying that would I be interested in having any contact with the Ugandan Asians and helping them. So I said, fine, yes. And it turned out that I was just doing 2 or 3 afternoons a week. And I wasn't with youngsters who I'd been teaching previously, but with the ladies of the camp, the mums. I think by then they'd brought in lots of people to educate the youngsters, and they got health people and this sort of thing. But I think the ladies were getting a bit bored because, after all, they were stuck in the camp. And I mean, Towing and transport is not the easiest of places. So therefore, to try and get to places was not great. And they thought it would be a good idea if the ladies had the opportunities to develop their English language skills and to learn a bit about life in the community, or in English or Welsh communities. So I'd go over to the camp, 2, 3 afternoons a week, and we'd meet up in a barracks room, yes? It was a really bleak room, I have to say. It wasn't conducive to anything. And we just chat, because I decided that was the only way that they were really going to learn anything. Some of them had very good English. Some of the older ones, it was not quite so good. So we did things like practicing going to buy apples. And I took magazines along, and they had magazines to read, to look at. I mean, nothing very exciting. Woman and good housekeeping, you know, woman's own. And we talked about things in general, just life and how it suited us, and about family life. So I told them about my children, as most mums, young mums do, and how brilliant and where they were, of course. And it was an interesting insight into their attitudes as well, in that I was talking about having had a little girl first, and Sian, and how gorgeous she was, and all the rest of it. And they went, oh. And I thought, oh, right, that's a bit odd. And then I said, and then we have a little boy. And he's a year old now. And, oh, that's lovely. And I said, oh, but why the difference? Because I'm just very pleased. I've got 2 little children who are well and fit and healthy. And I said, oh, well. You know, when you have a girl, the gold goes out of the family. But when you have a boy, the gold comes in. And well, I couldn't believe this story. You know, it was a very different attitude to things than we have got now. At that time, Towing was very parochial and not cosmopolitan at all. And you have to remember, 72, things like vegetarians weren't around, really. Yes? And so I invited the ladies, some of the ladies, to come for afternoon tea. And I did remember, of course, a lot of them were vegetarian. So trying to make afternoon tea, which in my usual pattern, you'd had salmon and cucumber sandwiches, and you'd had a nice cake, Victoria sandwich, and you'd have had, you know, all the usual bits. And I thought, I can't give them salmon and cucumber. We can just have cucumber sandwiches. We can have... I made barrabrieth with margarine, which I would never dream of doing normally, because I thought, well, that was okay. And I found a recipe for an apple cake, because I thought that one hadn't got eggs in, so that I think I was safe with that one for them. And we had jam sandwiches, which again is not my scene for afternoon tea. But the ladies seemed to enjoy it, you know, and it meant that they came and saw what our house was like. We weren't rich at the time, hadn't got loads of money. So, I mean, it was just an ordinary life. I'm sure they'd had far better lives. My house was probably very, very basic and much more primitive than the houses that they had come from, because they obviously, I think, had a far better standard of living in Uganda than we as locals had, in general terms. But we didn't have to fear Idi Amin. I remember that when they arrived, there was a lot of talk about how scared some of the Asians were coming off the train, just because some of the soldiers were there because they'd been clearing up the camp, making it ready for the Asians, and therefore they were on the platform to help them off the train and to get their belongings off. Not that they had that many belongings, I don't mean that. And how frightened they were of seeing these soldiers, because they were thinking of what they just left. And after all, it had been a traumatic journey to get there. And to then see soldiers again, I think must have frightened them a lot. And the other thing I remember was a friend taking the girls to the beach, thinking, well, it was a nice enough day to go down to the beach wrapped up. Remember, it is Towing in winter. And then the girls being quite scared because they had thought that a lot of the seaweed had been washed up and was floating in the water, and they thought it was crocodiles, which hadn't dawned on any of us. And I mean, they were very relieved when they knew it wasn't crocodiles, I have to say. But I don't think they bothered to go paddling, certainly not in winter weather anyway. I mean, at the time, I'm sure Towing people hadn't seen many Asian faces at all, because it was a parochial Welsh community. I mean, we saw the soldiers coming in, so we had different people coming in at that time, but I don't think there were that many different people around. I'm not sure how much prior to the situation and when Idi Amin made his announcement that we knew an awful lot about Africa or India or Pakistan at the time. I mean, we did know, certainly I knew about the Indian-Pakistani wars, because at one stage I was teaching in a school with Indian and Pakistani children, and how they got very het up with one another. And so I knew about that situation. But I think we have to remember too that all of us, the whole world was much bigger then, in that Africa was out of your remit, really and truly. It was so far away that, I mean, the fact that I've been there on holiday and things since then seems fantastic. I wouldn't have dreamt of it in 1972. It was a long way away. The history, I mean, I knew that the Asians had been recruited more or less by the British to go to Africa to help run, because they knew that they were very capable at civil service type jobs and these sort of things as well. And so they knew that they had that capability. But that again comes to the fact that why we didn't think African people would either. But I suppose that's the start of it all, isn't it? That as a government in the great long distant past, we thought we could shift communities around and let them mix as much and as like that, yeah, and not create problems. The government seemed to have organised things, whether, and I mean it wasn't the Welsh Assembly then, but the government in practice, that the health, the education, the civil servants, I was saying earlier that the civil service, it was Ugandan Asians that got my sister-in-law, as she is now, a job because she had passed her civil service exams but couldn't get a job in Aberystwyth. And then, of course, they brought the civil servants to Towing to help sort out national insurance numbers and all of those sort of things for people. So she managed to get into the civil service in Aberystwyth, and that's when she started her career in the civil service. So, you know, it had a knock-on effect for people in general. I wonder why we aren't taking the same attitude that the government did at that stage to the Ukrainians and the other refugees from Syria and other places like that, and the Afghani refugees who are still in hotels. Well, at least the Ugandan Asians were not here for more than, 4 or 5 months maximum, you know? And you feel at least they were on their way.